they laughed at him during a $1 million deal. Not quietly, not politely. They poured wine over his head in front of their entire board and called him a nobody. Phones weren't recording. This wasn't public. This was supposed to be safe. What no one in that room realized was that the quiet man at the table owned the deal, the building, and the power holding their entire empire together. He didn't argue. He didn't react. He stood up and walked out. And before the door even closed behind him, their downfall had already begun. If you enjoy stories where arrogance meets consequences, like this video, subscribe and comment "Wrong Man" below. Because this one gets brutal. The boardroom sat 47 floors above the city, glass, marble, and money pretending to be authority. Dominic Cross walked in alone. No assistants. No lawyers. No security. Just a charcoal suit, a simple silver watch, and a calm that didn't belong to this room. They noticed him instantly and dismissed him just as fast. The strategists barely looked up. Security watched him like a mistake. Smirks passed quietly across the table. He didn't look powerful enough. Didn't sound important enough. Didn't belong, at least that's what they thought. Dominic took the seat at the far end of the table and folded his hands. He said nothing, because underestimation was never a weakness. It was a weapon. And tonight, everyone in that room was about to learn what happens when you humiliate the wrong man. The quiet guest. Dominic Cross stepped out of the black sedan 3 blocks from Graham Tower. The driver offered to take him to the entrance, but Dominic waved him off. He preferred to walk, preferred to see the city the way most people saw it, street level, unfiltered, honest. The October air carried the smell of roasted chestnuts from a corner vendor and exhaust from idling taxis. People rushed past in their own worlds, briefcases swinging, phones pressed to ears, nobody looking at anyone. Dominic liked that too. Anonymity was a weapon most people didn't know how to use. Graham Tower rose 47 stories into the evening sky, all glass and steel and ambition. The kind of building designed to intimidate, to remind everyone who entered that they were standing in someone else's kingdom. Dominic had seen 100 buildings like this, had owned a few. They all looked impressive until you learned what held them up: debt, desperation, and deals made in rooms nobody talked about. He approached the revolving doors, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. A couple in designer coats pushed through ahead of him, laughing about something on a phone screen. They didn't glance back. To them, he was just another body in a suit. Inside, the lobby stretched wide and cold. Marble floors polished to a mirror finish. Chrome fixtures catching overhead lights. A massive abstract sculpture in the center, twisted metal that probably cost 6 figures and meant nothing. Behind a curved reception desk sat 2 women in matching black blazers, hair pulled back tight, smiles professional and empty. Dominic walked toward them. One of the receptionists was on the phone, nodding and typing. The other looked up, saw him, and her expression shifted, not recognition, just the reflexive assessment people in places like this made in half a second. Suit, decent but not designer. Watch, functional, not statement. No entourage, no assistant, no visible markers of wealth. Her smile thinned. "Can I help you?" The question came out clipped, the kind of tone reserved for people who might have wandered into the wrong building. "I'm here for the Graham Industries meeting. 7th floor executive suite." She glanced at her computer screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard but not typing. "Name." "Dominic Cross." Her fingers moved then, clicking through what was probably a digital guest list. The other receptionist finished her call and leaned over to look at the screen. They exchanged a glance, quick, almost imperceptible, but Dominic caught it. The universal language of gatekeepers who'd found someone not on the list. "I'm not seeing a Dominic Cross registered for tonight." Dominic reached into his jacket pocket slowly, deliberately. Both women's eyes tracked the movement. He pulled out the black invitation card, laid it on the counter. Heavy cardstock, embossed silver lettering, Graham Industries cordially invites Cross Ventures to finalize merger agreement. 7:00 p.m. Executive Suite 47. The first receptionist picked it up, turned it over, studied the Cross Ventures seal on the back, a stylized silver cross inside a circle. She looked at her colleague again. We weren't told about any solo arrivals. Usually these high-level meetings, the guests come with legal teams, assistants. I don't need a legal team. Right, but she set the card down, didn't push it back toward him. Protocol requires us to verify with Mr. Graham's office before sending anyone up, especially for executive floor access. You understand. Dominic said nothing, just waited, let the silence do the work. The second receptionist picked up the phone, dialed an extension, turned slightly away, voice dropping to a murmur. Hi, it's reception. We have a guest here claiming to be on the list for the 7 o'clock merger meeting, last name Cross. Pause. No, he's alone, just him. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, yes, I'll let him know. She hung up, and both women looked at Dominic with expressions that had shifted from skeptical to vaguely uncomfortable. Someone from the executive team will come down to escort you. Please wait in the seating area. She gestured toward a cluster of modern chairs near the sculpture, black leather, low backs, designed more for aesthetics than comfort. Dominic took his invitation card back, slipped it into his pocket, and walked to the seating area. He didn't sit, just stood near the windows, hands in his pockets, watching the city lights blink on as dusk settled over the streets. Behind him, he could hear the receptionists whispering. Not the words, just the tone, confusion mixed with something else. Doubt, maybe, or the instinct that told prey when a predator had entered the space. 10 minutes passed. People moved through the lobby, executives heading home, delivery personnel dropping off packages, a maintenance worker pushing a cart. Everyone had a place, a purpose, a reason to be there. Dominic stood still, watching reflections in the glass. Then the elevator chimed. Doors slid open, and a man in a gray suit emerged, mid-30s, sharp jawline, ID badge clipped to his belt. He scanned the lobby, eyes landing on Dominic with the certainty of someone who'd been told exactly what to look for. The guy who doesn't belong. He approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Cross. That's right. I'm Anderson, senior strategist with Graham Industries. We weren't expecting you to arrive without your team. I don't have a team. Anderson's smile flickered. I see. Well, protocol usually requires advance notice for solo attendees at executive-level meetings. Security purposes, you understand. I have an invitation. Yes, reception mentioned that, but you have to understand we've had issues in the past with. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Unauthorized individuals attempting to gain access to sensitive meetings. I'm sure you can appreciate the need for caution. Dominic looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the expensive suit that couldn't hide the insecurity, the rehearsed confidence that cracked around the edges, the desperation to appear important in front of the receptionists who were absolutely listening to every word. Call George Graham, Dominic said quietly. Tell him Dominic Cross is here. He'll clear it up. Anderson's jaw tightened. Mr. Graham is preparing for the meeting and doesn't appreciate being disturbed for. Then I'll wait. Silence hung between them. Anderson clearly hadn't expected resistance. People in buildings like this usually backed down when challenged by someone with a title and a badge. But Dominic didn't move, didn't blink, didn't give an inch. Finally, Anderson pulled out his phone, walked a few steps away, and made a call. His voice rose slightly, not quite arguing, but close. After 30 seconds, he returned, expression carefully neutral. You're cleared to go up. Follow me. They walked to the elevator. Anderson swiped his badge, pressed 47. The doors closed, and the car began to rise. Neither man spoke. The elevator music played something soft and meaningless. At the 42nd floor, Anderson broke the silence. Just so you know, Mr. Cross, the Grahams run a very particular kind of operation. They value professionalism, presentation, and respect for hierarchy. First impressions matter. Dominic watched the floor numbers climb. Good to know. I'm just saying, coming in alone unannounced. No support staff, it sends a message. And not necessarily the one you want to send if you're serious about this partnership. The elevator chimed. 47. Doors slid open to a hallway lined with dark wood panels and recessed lighting. At the end, double doors stood closed. Voices filtered through, laughter, the clink of glasses. Anderson gestured forward. After you. Dominic stepped into the hallway, and for just a moment before the doors opened, he allowed himself a small, cold smile. They had no idea what message he was sending. But they would. The inner circle. Anderson pushed open the double doors, and the atmosphere changed instantly. The executive suite sprawled before them, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city's glittering skyline, a glass conference table that could seat 20, abstract art that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. The air smelled of expensive coffee and something sharper, something that reminded Dominic of blood in the water. 6 people occupied the space, arranged around the room like pieces on a chessboard. They'd been mid-conversation when the doors opened, but now all eyes turned toward the entrance, toward him. Anderson stepped aside, gestured vaguely in Dominic's direction. Everyone, this is Mr. Cross, from Cross Ventures. The reaction was immediate, though subtle. Eyebrows raised. Glances exchanged. A woman near the windows set down her coffee cup with deliberate slowness, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to something closer to amusement. That was Eva. Dominic recognized her from the research his people had compiled. Lead strategist, Graham's right hand, known for dismantling competitors with the kind of precision that came from enjoying the work. She wore a black pantsuit that probably cost $3,000, her dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but wasn't. Her eyes moved over Dominic like a scanner, cataloging every detail. The off-the-rack suit, the simple watch, the absence of any visible entourage. She smiled, not warmly. Cross Ventures, she repeated, the name rolling off her tongue like she was tasting it. I was expecting something more substantial. A man near the coffee station laughed, short bark, quickly stifled. That was Anderson, though this was a different Anderson than the one who'd escorted him up. Younger, sharper suit, expression that radiated Ivy League privilege and the certainty that he'd never face real consequences for anything. He held a porcelain cup like it was a prop, like everything in his life was a prop in a performance he'd been rehearsing since birth. Substantial, Anderson echoed, glancing at Eva. That's diplomatic. Beside him stood Jessica, 30-something with perfect highlights and a smile that could sell anything or hide anything, depending on what the situation required. Her dress was designer, her jewelry understated but expensive. She tilted her head, studying Dominic the way someone might study an unexpected stain on expensive fabric. I'm sorry, she said, voice sweet with an edge underneath. I thought Cross Ventures was sending a team. Legal, finance, the usual support structure for deals of this magnitude. Just me, Dominic said. Just you, Jessica's smile widened. How refreshingly minimalist. Near the windows, a woman in a cream-colored blazer turned fully to face him. Victoria. CFO's niece, positioned in the company through connections rather than competence, but smart enough to know how to weaponize her proximity to power. She exchanged a look with the man beside her, Swan, Graham's operations director, mid-40s with silver threading through his hair, and the kind of face that never quite committed to any expression. Forgive me for asking, Victoria said, her tone suggesting she wasn't sorry at all. But is this some kind of new negotiation tactic? Send in the preliminary representative to test the waters before the real players arrive. Swan nodded slowly, like she'd voiced something he'd been thinking. It would make sense. These merger discussions can get complex. Maybe Cross Ventures wants to gauge our position before committing their senior team. I am the senior team, Dominic said quietly. The room went silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then someone laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that came from the man standing near the door. Brock. Head of security, former military, the kind of muscle that wore suits but never looked comfortable in them. He had his arms crossed, expression hovering somewhere between amusement and contempt. "You're the entire team," Brock repeated, "for $1 million merger." "That's right." Eva moved closer, heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She circled Dominic slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "Interesting approach. Most people bring lawyers to deals like this. Accountants. Someone who actually understands corporate structure." "I understand it fine." "Do you?" She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something French, something that cost more per ounce than most bottles of wine. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone who wandered into the wrong building. Maybe got off on the wrong floor. Happens more than you'd think in a tower this size." Anderson, the younger one, snorted into his coffee. Jessica covered her smile with her hand, but her eyes gave her away. Swan and Victoria had moved closer, drawn by the scent of humiliation the way sharks move toward blood. "That suit," Jessica said, her voice carrying just enough volume for everyone to hear. "Is that off the rack?" "Men's Warehouse," Anderson suggested, grinning. "Oh God, don't insult Men's Warehouse," Eva cut in. "They have standards." The laughter came easier now, fed by the pack mentality that took over when predators sensed weakness. Or what they thought was weakness. Dominic stood motionless in the center of their circle, hands relaxed at his sides, face betraying nothing. He'd been in worse rooms with worse people, had survived interrogations that made corporate mockery look like playground teasing. These people had no idea what real cruelty looked like. They were playing at power the way children played at war. Victoria stepped forward, examining his watch. "Is that a Seiko?" "It is." "How practical?" She glanced at Swan. "I didn't know they still made those." "Vintage, maybe," Swan offered. "Like deliberately vintage. Is that what we're going with here?" "My father gave it to me," Dominic said evenly. "Ah," Eva's smile turned sharp. "Sentimental value. How touching. Though I'm not sure sentimentality is what we need in a business partner. We were hopping for someone with, actual resources, actual presence." Brock moved from the doorway, positioning himself slightly behind Dominic. Not threatening exactly, but the message was clear. Know your place, and your place is surrounded. "Listen," Brock said, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Maybe there's been some kind of miscommunication. Maybe you're a junior associate or something, sent ahead to prepare materials. That would make more sense. Because no offense, but you don't exactly scream $1 million investor." "What do I scream?" Dominic asked. The question hung in the air. Brock's smile faded slightly, like he'd expected submission, not engagement. "Anderson," the escort cleared his throat. "I did try to explain downstairs that protocol usually requires." "We know what protocol requires," Eva interrupted. She turned back to Dominic, her expression shifting to something almost pitying. "Look, Mr. Cross, I'm sure you're very good at whatever it is you actually do. But this meeting is for principals only. The people who actually sign the checks, make the decisions, carry the weight. If Cross Ventures sent you to take notes or observe, that's fine, but you'll need to wait outside until the actual representatives arrive." "I told you, I'm the representative." Jessica laughed, the sound high and artificial. "Honey, no one shows up to $1 million deal dressed like they're interviewing for middle management. It's just not how this works." "Maybe he doesn't know how this works," Victoria suggested. "Maybe Cross Ventures is some kind of startup, new money trying to play in the big leagues." Swan nodded thoughtfully. That would explain the lack of presentation skills, the absence of proper preparation. "The sad little watch," Anderson added, grinning. Dominic absorbed it all, every slight, every smirk. Every moment they revealed exactly who they were beneath the expensive clothes and polished surfaces. He cataloged it the way he'd cataloged 1,000 other rooms full of people who thought cruelty was sophistication, who mistook their positions for actual power. Eva checked her phone, then looked up. "The Grahams will be here in 10 minutes. I suggest you use that time to call your actual superiors and let them know they need to send someone appropriate. Someone who looks like they belong in this room." "I belong in this room," Dominic said quietly. The temperature seemed to drop. Something in his voice, not louder, not threatening, just absolute, made several of them pause. But Eva recovered quickly, her smile returning. Sure you do, just like I belong at the head table at the Met Gala. Belief is important. More laughter. Brock shook his head, muttering something about amateur hour. Jessica returned to her conversation with Victoria, already dismissing Dominic as irrelevant. Anderson checked his reflection in the window, adjusting his tie. Only Swan kept watching Dominic, expression unreadable. For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes, not recognition exactly, but the faint awareness that perhaps they'd missed something. Then the moment passed, and he turned away. Dominic moved to the end of the conference table, the seat farthest from where the Grahams would sit. He pulled out the chair and sat down, folded his hands on the glass surface, and waited. The strategics continued their conversations, their laughter, their performance of power. None of them noticed that Dominic had stopped listening. None of them saw the calculation behind his stillness. They would. Power play. The double doors opened at exactly 7 o'clock and the room transformed. Eva straightened her posture. Anderson set down his coffee cup. Jessica smoothed her dress. Swan adjusted his cufflinks. Victoria's smile shifted from casual to performative. Even Brock moved to attention, shoulders back, chin up. The strategics had been predators a moment ago. Now they were courtiers. Sarah Graham entered first, and she entered the way empires entered conquered territories, with absolute certainty that everything she saw already belonged to her. The emerald dress caught the overhead lights and threw them back like a challenge. Diamonds glittered at her throat, her wrists, her ears. Each piece probably cost more than most people's cars, and she wore them with the casual indifference of someone who'd never had to think about cost. Her eyes swept the room in a single, dismissive arc, taking inventory, confirming that her kingdom remained intact. Behind her came George Graham, and where Sarah was sharp edges and brilliant surfaces, George was controlled power wrapped in tailored navy wool. His suit fit him the way a suit fits someone who has 3 fittings and a personal tailor on retainer. Silver cufflinks caught the light. His salt and pepper hair was styled with the kind of precision that looked effortless but wasn't. He moved like a man who'd never been refused anything, who'd never encountered a door that didn't open when he approached. The strategics created a receiving line without being told, arranging themselves in order of importance. Eva first, then Anderson, then the others cascading down the hierarchy like dominoes. Sarah, Eva's voice carried warmth that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. You look stunning. I know, Sarah replied, not breaking stride. She air-kissed Eva's cheeks, the kind of gesture that involved no actual contact, just proximity and performance. George moved down the line, shaking hands with the precision of a man who'd been doing this since childhood. Firm grip, direct eye contact, just enough smile to suggest warmth without actually committing to it. Anderson, good to see you. Mr. Graham, always a pleasure. Jessica, that's a lovely dress. You're too kind. Down the line. Swan, Victoria, Brock, each one receiving their moment of acknowledgement, their confirmation that they still mattered in the Graham universe. Then Sarah's eyes landed on Dominic. She'd been mid-turn toward the head of the table when she registered his presence. The quiet figure at the far end, hands folded on the glass surface, expression neutral. Her movement stopped. Just for a second, but long enough for everyone to notice. Who, she said, the word emerging with the kind of precision people use when they're already annoyed. Is that? Eva moved quickly to her side. That's Mr. Cross, from Cross Ventures. Sarah's eyebrows rose incrementally. Cross Ventures sent him. Apparently he's the entire delegation, Anderson offered, unable to keep the amusement out of his voice. George had turned now too, following his wife's gaze. He studied Dominic the way someone might study an unexpected piece on a chessboard, trying to determine if it was a mistake or a strategy. Mr. Cross, George said, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone used to controlling rooms. We were expecting a more comprehensive team. This is the team, Dominic replied. Sarah laughed, not a polite laugh, not even a cruel laugh, just genuine, surprised amusement at something so absurd she couldn't process it any other way. You're joking, she looked at Eva. He's joking, right? I don't think he is, Eva said quietly. Sarah walked toward Dominic's end of the table, heels clicking against hardwood like a countdown. She didn't sit, just stood at the opposite end, hands on her hips, studying him with the kind of open assessment usually reserved for livestock auctions. Let me understand this correctly, she said, her voice rising just enough to ensure everyone heard. Cross Ventures, a company we've never heard of until 3 weeks ago, is proposing to finalize a $1 million merger deal. And they sent you. Alone, no lawyers, no accountants, no one who actually matters. I matter, Dominic said evenly. The room went still. George's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something that might have been interest or might have been irritation. Sarah's smile widened, but there was nothing warm in it. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone who got lost on the way to a job interview. Jessica covered her mouth, but her shoulders shook. Anderson didn't bother hiding his grin. Victoria whispered something to Swan that made him smirk. George moved to the head of the table, pulling out his chair but not sitting yet. Mr. Cross, let's be direct. Graham Industries doesn't do business with amateurs. We don't entertain proposals from companies that can't demonstrate basic professional competence. And showing up to $1 million negotiation without proper representation suggests either incompetence or disrespect. Or poverty, Sarah added sweetly. Maybe Cross Ventures couldn't afford to send anyone else. More laughter rippled through the strategics. Brock leaned against the wall, arms crossed, enjoying the show. Dominic let them have their moment. Let them feel powerful. Let them believe they controlled this room, this conversation, this outcome. George finally sat, gesturing for Sarah to take the chair beside him. She did, crossing her legs with deliberate elegance, her emerald dress pooling around her like liquid confidence. Here's what's going to happen, George said, his tone shifting to the one he probably used with underperforming employees. You're going to call whoever actually runs Cross Ventures. You're going to explain that Graham Industries requires proper representation for deals of this magnitude. And you're going to arrange for the appropriate people to attend a rescheduled meeting, assuming we decide there's value in rescheduling at all. I'm the appropriate people, Dominic said. Sarah laughed again, louder this time. Honey, no, you're really not. Eva had taken her seat, tablet open in front of her. Mr. Cross, I think what the Grahams are trying to communicate is that there are standards in high-level corporate negotiations, protocols, expectations. You can't just walk into a room like this and expect to be taken seriously without demonstrating the infrastructure to support a deal of this scale. What infrastructure? Dominic asked. Legal teams, Anderson said, ticking off fingers. Financial advisors, corporate counsel, due diligence documentation, the basic framework that proves you're not wasting everyone's time. George leaned back in his chair, the posture of a man settling in to deliver a verdict. Mr. Cross, I'm a busy man. My wife is a busy woman. These people, he gestured to the strategics, bill at rates you probably can't imagine. Every minute we spend in this room has value, real value. And right now, you're suggesting we invest that value in someone who can't even dress appropriately for the occasion. Sarah's eyes glittered. That suit is tragic, by the way. I meant to mention that earlier. Men's Warehouse, Jessica whispered loudly to Victoria. They both dissolved into giggles. Dominic absorbed it all. The mockery, the contempt, the absolute certainty in their voices that they held every advantage, controlled every variable, owned every outcome. George pulled a folder from the briefcase beside his chair, opened it, and slid a single sheet of paper down the table toward Dominic. It skidded across the glass, stopping halfway. That's our counteroffer, George said. Terms revised to reflect Graham Industries' concerns about Cross Ventures' legitimacy and stability. You'll notice the valuation has been adjusted downward. Significantly, consider it a reality check. Sarah leaned forward, elbows on the table, chin resting on interlaced fingers. Or you can walk away now. Save yourself the embarrassment. Go back to whatever strip mall office you crawled out of and tell your boss this was never going to work. I don't have a boss, Dominic said quietly. Sure you don't, Sarah replied. Just like you don't need lawyers, just like you don't need to dress like a professional, just like you don't need any of the things that separate real players from pretenders. She reached for the wine bottle on the table, expensive Bordeaux, already uncorked, probably breathing since before Dominic arrived. She poured herself a glass with deliberate slowness, the red liquid catching the light. You know what this is? She held up the glass. This is a 2015 Chateau Margaux, $1,200 a bottle. I drink it because I can, because I've earned the right to drink it. She took a sip, savoring it. What do you drink, Mr. Cross? Water. The strategics erupted in laughter. Even George smiled, just slightly. Sarah set down her glass and stood, walking around the table toward Dominic. The room watched her move, sensing something building, some performance about to reach its climax. She stopped beside Dominic's chair, looking down at him the way someone might look at a stain they'd just noticed. This isn't a game you can win, she said softly, just for him. Then louder for the room. This isn't a game you were ever invited to play. The insult. Sarah circled Dominic's chair slowly, her heels creating a rhythm against the hardwood that felt deliberate, calculated. The room had gone quiet in the way spaces go quiet when everyone senses something is about to happen. The strategics had stopped pretending to work, tablets forgotten, coffee cooling in their cups. Even George leaned back in his chair with the faint smile of someone settling in to watch a show he'd seen before and enjoyed every time. She completed her circle and stopped directly behind Dominic, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixing with the wine on her breath. Her hand came to rest on the back of his chair, fingers drumming once, twice, 3 times. You know what I think? Sarah's voice carried that particular tone wealthy people use when they're about to say something cruel and want everyone to hear it. I think Cross Ventures doesn't exist. Not really. I think you're some kind of desperate middleman, maybe a broker who got in over his head, thought he could bluff his way into a real deal. She moved around to face him, perching on the edge of the table, her emerald dress spilling across the glass surface like a deliberate claim of territory. She picked up her wine glass, swirled it, watched the light play through the liquid. Eva, what do we usually do with people who waste our time? Eva didn't miss a beat. We make sure they understand the cost of it. That's right. Sarah took another sip, her eyes never leaving Dominic's face. We make sure they understand. Dominic sat perfectly still, hands still folded on the table, expression giving away nothing. He could feel the weight of the room's attention, could sense the pack mentality taking hold. They were feeding off Sarah's energy, off each other, off the shared cruelty that bonded them together. Stand up, Sarah said suddenly. Dominic didn't move. I said stand up, her voice sharpened. When I tell you to do something in my building, you do it. The silence stretched. George's smile widened fractionally. Anderson leaned forward in his seat. Brock pushed off from the wall, his posture shifting to something more alert, more ready. This is fascinating, Jessica whispered to Victoria, but loud enough for everyone to hear. He actually thinks he has a choice. Sarah set her wine glass down on the table with a soft click. Let me explain something to you, Mr. Cross. This building, mine. This company, mine. These people. She gestured to the strategics. Mine. You walked into my world uninvited, underdressed, and unprepared. The least you can do is show some basic respect when given a direct instruction. I'm here for a business meeting, Dominic said quietly. Not a performance. The room erupted in laughter. Anderson actually slapped the table. Swan shook his head, grinning. Victoria covered her mouth, but her eyes were bright with amusement. Sarah's expression shifted, the smile dropping away, replaced by something colder, sharper. A performance. That's what you think this is. She stood, smoothing her dress with one hand, picking up her wine glass with the other. She walked around to Dominic's side, close enough now that he had to tilt his head slightly to look up at her. George, honey, she said, her voice carrying that sweet tone that meant something vicious was coming. "Do you remember that investor from Boston? The one who showed up to our Harbor District presentation in khakis and a polo shirt?" George nodded, his smile genuine now. Marcus something. Thought business casual meant casual business. "That's right, and what did we do?" "We explained that Graham Industries has standards. That if he couldn't respect those standards, we couldn't respect his investment." "Exactly." Sarah turned back to Dominic. "We taught him about respect, about knowing your place, about understanding that some rooms require more than just showing up." She raised her wine glass, holding it above Dominic's head, tilting it just slightly. A single drop fell, landing on his shoulder, darkening the fabric of his charcoal suit. "Oops," she said, not sounding sorry at all. Eva's hand went to her mouth, but her eyes were laughing. Anderson's grin stretched wider. Jessica had her phone in her hand now, angled toward the table, recording or ready to record. "Sarah," George said, but there was no warning in his voice. Just mild interest, the tone of someone commenting on whether they found mildly entertaining. "What?" Sarah's voice rose with artificial innocence. "I'm just trying to help. Maybe a little baptism, a little christening, will help Mr. Cross understand the gravity of where he is, what's expected of him." Another drop fell, then another. Each one deliberate, measured, a test to see how far she could push before getting a reaction. Dominic remained motionless. His eyes stayed on the contract in front of him, on the numbers George had slid down the table, on the revised terms that had cut the valuation in half. He didn't flinch, didn't look up, didn't give her what she wanted. And that, more than anything, seemed to ignite something in Sarah Graham. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," she snapped. Dominic raised his eyes slowly, met her gaze, said nothing. The room held its breath. Sarah's hand trembled slightly, not with fear, with rage. With the pure, undiluted fury of someone who'd never been denied, never been ignored, never been treated as anything less than the center of gravity in any room she entered. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice dropping to something almost intimate, almost personal. "You don't belong in this building, in this meeting, in this world. You're a nobody playing dress-up, and I'm done pretending otherwise." She tilted the glass further. Wine spilled over the rim, a thin stream that hit Dominic's shoulder, his collar, spreading across the fabric in a dark stain. "Sarah," George's voice carried a note of caution now, but not enough to stop anything. More like a director suggesting an actor might be overplaying a scene, but not actually calling cut. "What, George? He needs to learn. They all need to learn." She gestured with the glass, wine sloshing. "Every person who thinks they can walk into our world without paying the price, without understanding the hierarchy, without knowing their place." Brock had moved closer, hovering near Dominic's chair. Not threatening exactly, but present. A reminder that if this got out of hand, there were people in the room who could handle it. Swan and Victoria had their phones out now too, not even bothering to hide it, capturing the moment. The humiliation, the lesson being taught. Sarah raised the glass higher, holding it directly above Dominic's head now. Red wine dripped steadily, landing in his hair, running down his forehead, staining his collar darker and darker. "This is what happens," she said loudly, playing to the room now, "when you forget who you're dealing with. When you think you can show up to $1 million deal in a cheap suit and a dollar store watch and expect to be treated like you matter." The wine kept falling. Dominic's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The only sign that he registered what was happening. "Say something," Sarah demanded. "Apologize, admit you were wrong, admit you don't belong here." Dominic said nothing. "Say it," her voice cracked with frustration. And then she did it. In one fluid motion, she inverted the glass completely, pouring the remaining wine directly over Dominic's head. Rich, red Bordeaux cascaded down his face, soaking his hair, running down his neck, staining his white shirt crimson, dripping onto the contract in front of him. The room exploded. Anderson jumped up, laughing so hard he had to grab the table for support. Jessica's phone was up, definitely recording now. Victoria clapped her hands together. Swan shook his head with delighted disbelief. Even Eva, usually so controlled, covered her smile with her hand. Brock stepped back, giving Sarah room, giving the moment space to breathe. George stood slowly, walking around the table to his wife's side. He looked down at Dominic, at the wine-soaked man sitting motionless in his chair, and shook his head. "That's a shame," George said, his voice carrying mock sympathy. "That suit was almost presentable." Sarah set the empty glass down on the table with a definitive click. "Now you look like what you are, someone who doesn't belong." Wine dripped from Dominic's hair, ran down his face, pooled in his lap. He sat perfectly still, hands still folded on the table, though now they rested in a spreading puddle of Bordeaux. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, looking at nothing, looking at everything. The laughter continued, filling the room, bouncing off the glass and marble and expensive art. Phones captured it from multiple angles. The strategics would share this later, Dominic knew. It would become a story they told at parties, at other meetings, a cautionary tale about knowing your place. Sarah leaned down, her face close to Dominic's ear. "Consider yourself christened," she whispered. "Welcome to the real world." Then she straightened, smoothed her dress, and returned to her seat beside George as if nothing unusual had happened. As if publicly humiliating someone was just another Tuesday in the Graham Empire. Dominic reached into his jacket pocket. The room tensed slightly. Brock's hand moved toward his hip instinctively. But Dominic only pulled out a white handkerchief, monogrammed with a small silver cross in the corner. Slowly, methodically, he wiped his face. The wine had already started to dry, sticky and dark. He folded the handkerchief carefully, returned it to his pocket, and pushed his chair back. He stood. The laughter died. The silent exit. Dominic stood slowly, the movement so controlled it seemed to happen in stages. First his weight shifted forward, then his hands left the table, then his legs straightened until he was upright, facing the room. Wine dripped from his hair onto his shoulders, darkening the already stained fabric of his suit. A thin rivulet ran down his temple, along his jaw, disappearing into his collar. He didn't wipe it away, not yet. The laughter had stopped the moment he stood, replaced by something that felt like anticipation or maybe nervousness. Sarah still sat in her chair, triumphant smile fixed on her face, but her fingers had tightened around the empty wine glass. George watched with the careful neutrality of someone waiting to see what move came next. The strategics had gone silent, phones still recording, eyes tracking Dominic's every micro-movement. Brock had positioned himself between Dominic and the door, casual stance but ready. His hand hung near his hip, near where security personnel typically kept things they didn't want visible but needed accessible. Dominic reached up with one hand and touched his face, fingers coming away red. He looked at them for a moment, at the wine staining his skin, then reached into his jacket pocket again. This time he moved even slower, making sure everyone saw that his hand emerged holding only the monogrammed handkerchief. He unfolded it with deliberate care, the white fabric stark against his wine-darkened hands. The silver cross embroidered in the corner caught the overhead lights. He brought it to his face and began wiping away the wine, methodical strokes across his forehead, down his cheeks, along his jaw. The handkerchief turned pink, then red, but he continued until his face was mostly clean, though his hair still dripped and his shirt remained soaked. No one spoke. The silence had weight now, had texture. It pressed against the room like something physical. Anderson shifted in his seat, the leather creaking. Jessica lowered her phone slightly, uncertainty flickering across her face. Even Eva's composed expression showed a crack, a furrow between her eyebrows that suggested she was recalculating something. Dominic folded the stained handkerchief carefully, precisely, making each fold exact. He returned it to his jacket pocket, then reached down and picked up the contract George had slid across the table, the revised terms, the reduced valuation, the reality check. Wine had soaked into the paper, making it translucent in places, the numbers bleeding together. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he set it back down on the table, centered it exactly where it had been. "Mr. Cross," George said, and his voice carried a new note now, something that might have been caution. "I think we should all take a moment to." Dominic adjusted his jacket, pulling it straight despite the wine stains, despite the wet fabric clinging to his shoulders. He buttoned it with the same methodical precision he'd used to fold the handkerchief. One button, then the other. His movements were unhurried, almost meditative. Sarah's smile had faded. "Where do you think you're going?" Dominic didn't answer, didn't look at her. He simply turned toward the door. Brock stepped into his path, arms crossed. "Hold on, you can't just..." Dominic looked at him, really looked at him, said nothing. Just held his gaze with eyes that had gone completely flat, completely cold. The kind of eyes that had seen things Brock, for all his military background, had probably only heard stories about. Brock's arms uncrossed. He took a half step to the side. "Wait," Eva said, standing now. "Mr. Cross, let's not be hasty. We can discuss." Dominic walked past her, past Anderson, who'd half risen from his chair, past Jessica, whose phone had lowered completely, past Swan and Victoria, both of whom had pressed back against their seats as if making room, past the glass table with its puddle of wine and bleeding contract. "You can't just walk out," Sarah called after him, her voice rising, losing the controlled superiority she'd had before. "We haven't finished. The meeting hasn't." The door opened. Anderson, the first Anderson, the one who'd escorted Dominic up, stood in the doorway, probably drawn by the commotion, probably expecting to help remove an unruly guest. His mouth opened to say something, but he caught sight of Dominic's wine-stained suit, his wet hair, his expression. Anderson stepped aside. Dominic walked through the doorway without breaking stride. His footsteps echoed in the hallway beyond, steady and measured. "Someone stop him," Sarah snapped. "Brock, for God's sake." But Brock didn't move, just stood there, hands at his sides, watching Dominic disappear down the corridor. George had risen from his chair now, moving toward the door. "Mr. Cross, if you'll just..." The sound of the elevator arriving echoed down the hall. Ding, doors sliding open. George reached the doorway just in time to see Dominic step into the elevator car. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second across the distance. Dominic's hand moved to his inside jacket pocket, pulling out his phone. The motion was casual, routine, the kind of thing people did 100 times a day. But something about it made George's stomach tighten. The elevator doors began to close. George started forward, hand raised. "Wait, we should talk about..." The doors shut with a soft, final sound. George stood in the hallway, staring at the brushed steel doors, at his own distorted reflection. Behind him, the strategics had crowded into the doorway, all of them watching, all of them suddenly uncertain. "Should we?" Eva started. "He can't do anything," Sarah said, but her voice had lost its edge. She'd followed them into the hallway, still holding the empty wine glass. "He's nobody. He showed up here with nothing. No team, no resources, no power. What's he going to do?" No one answered. Through the hallway windows, they could see the city spreading out below them, 47 floors down. Lights flickering on as evening settled in. Traffic moving in slow rivers along the streets. The normal world continuing, unaware that something had shifted. In the elevator, Dominic wiped a fresh trickle of wine from his temple. The car descended smoothly, floor numbers ticking down on the digital display. 46, 45, 44. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, the screen lighting up his face in the dimness. His thumb moved across the surface, pulling up a contact. Just one. A number with no name attached, though he knew exactly whose it was. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. 39th floor, 30 "It's done," Dominic said when the line connected. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, as if he was discussing weather or dinner plans. "Pull everything, every dollar, every connection, every channel." A pause, a voice on the other end asking a question. "All of it," Dominic confirmed. "Lock them out, freeze the accounts, terminate the partnerships. I want Graham Industries dark by midnight." Another pause, another question. "No," Dominic said, and now something crept into his voice, something that had been absent upstairs, something cold and absolute and utterly remorseless. No exceptions, no warnings, no grace period. They wanted to see what happens when you disrespect the wrong person. Show them. He ended the call, returned the phone to his pocket, watched the floor numbers continue their descent. 25th floor, 24th. His reflection stared back at him from the polished elevator walls. Wine-stained suit, darkened hair, red splotches on his white shirt. He looked like someone who'd lost, someone who'd been humiliated, someone who'd been broken. He looked exactly how they wanted him to look. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. 15th floor, 14th. The elevator chimed softly at each floor, a gentle countdown. Dominic straightened his tie, adjusted his jacket one more time, wiped a final trace of wine from his jaw. 7th floor, 6th. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, his face had returned to complete neutrality. The doors opened onto the marble expanse, the chrome fixtures, the abstract sculpture that meant nothing. The same two receptionists sat behind their curved desk, but they didn't look up, didn't notice the wine-stained man walking past them toward the revolving doors. Dominic stepped out into the October evening. The air had turned colder, carrying the smell of approaching rain. His black sedan waited at the curb, the driver standing beside it, door already open. The driver's eyes widened at the sight of Dominic's condition, but he said nothing, just waited. Dominic slid into the back seat. The door closed with a heavy, final sound. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. "Home," Dominic said. The sedan pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic, disappearing into the flow of cars and lights and ordinary people living ordinary lives. Behind them, 47 floors up, the Graham strategics were returning to the conference room, their nervous laughter starting to rebuild, their certainty slowly returning. They had no idea what was coming. They had 90 minutes before everything they knew turned to ash. The shadow directive. The sedan moved through evening traffic with the patient rhythm of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. Dominic sat in the back seat, perfectly still except for his right hand, which reached up occasionally to catch wine drops still falling from his hair onto the leather upholstery. Each time, he wiped his fingers on what remained clean of his handkerchief, the fabric now more red than white. The driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror every few seconds, questions clearly forming behind his professional silence. He'd been with Dominic for 3 years, had picked him up from hospitals and crime scenes and places that didn't have names on maps. But he'd never seen him like this, soaked in wine, suit ruined, hair dripping red onto his collar. "Sir," the driver finally said, his voice carefully neutral, "do you need me to stop somewhere? Get you?" "No," Dominic said quietly. "Keep driving." They passed through intersections where people hurried along sidewalks, briefcases swinging, phones pressed to ears, everyone rushing toward dinner reservations or gym sessions or home to families waiting for them. Normal people with normal problems. They had no idea that fortunes were about to shift, that empires were about to crumble, that the city's economic landscape was about to be redrawn in the time it took to order takeout. Dominic pulled his phone out again, the screen casting pale light across his wine-stained features. He scrolled through contacts, past names that would mean nothing to most people, but everything to those who understood how power actually worked in the city. Past politicians and judges, past union bosses and real estate developers, past the visible faces of legitimate business. He stopped on a number with no name. Just 10 digits that connected directly to the person who'd helped him build his empire from blood and violence into something that looked clean on balance sheets. He pressed call. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, sharp and efficient. "I saw the tracker. You left Graham Tower. Did they sign?" "No," Dominic said. A pause. "What happened?" "They decided to teach me about respect." The woman on the other end, Marcus, his chief financial operative, the person who'd helped transition the Cross Syndicate's money from offshore accounts and shell corporations into legitimate investment portfolios, let out a slow breath. "How bad?" Wine, Dominic said simply, poured over my head, in front of their entire strategic team. Phones were recording. Another pause, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, her voice had changed temperature. Tell me what you need. Dominic watched the city slide past the window, lights beginning to blink on in office buildings where people were working late, chasing promotions and bonuses, and the illusion that their efforts mattered in the larger scheme of things. Graham Industries has 12 primary accounts, he said, his voice carrying the flat precision of someone reciting a shopping list. Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and 9 smaller institutions. I want all of them frozen within the hour. Frozen, Marcus repeated. You mean temporary holds while we... I mean locked, permanently. Every account, every line of credit, every financial instrument they have access to. I want their CFO to wake up tomorrow morning and find out he can't buy coffee with a company card. He could hear typing on the other end, rapid-fire clicks as Marcus pulled up files. That's going to require calling in significant favors, the kind we've been saving for. Use them, Dominic said, all of them. More typing. Okay, what else? Their development partnerships. They have 6 major projects in progress. The Harbor District renovation, the West Side luxury condos, the downtown mixed-use tower, the waterfront retail complex, I have the list, Marcus interrupted. What do you want done? Pull our money from every single one. Immediately. No phase-out, no transition period. And make sure the other investors know why we're pulling out. If we do that, those projects collapse, construction stops, contractors don't get paid, people lose jobs. I know, Dominic said. A beat of silence, then, you're burning it all down. Every brick. Marcus made a sound that might have been approval or concern, hard to tell over the phone. The $1 million merger deal, I assume that's dead. Not dead, Dominic corrected. Terminated with extreme prejudice. I want a formal withdrawal notice sent to Graham Industries within 30 minutes. I want it copied to every financial publication in the city. I want the press release to hit Bloomberg, Reuters, the Wall Street Journal, and every local business outlet before the Grahams finish their celebratory dinner. Jesus, Marcus breathed. You want them to watch it happen in real time. I want them to feel every second of it. The typing had stopped. Marcus was listening now, really listening, the way she did when Dominic was about to give orders that couldn't be taken back. Their strategic team, Dominic continued. Eva, Anderson, Jessica, Swan, Victoria, Brock. I want background checks run on all of them. Full financial analysis. Debts, dependencies, vulnerabilities, everything. Planning to leverage them. Planning to give them a choice, Dominic said. They can distance themselves from the Grahams starting tonight, or they can go down with the ship. Either way, I want them to know the ship is sinking because of what they watched happen and did nothing to stop. That's a lot of moving parts, Marcus said. Are you sure you want to move this fast? If we take a few days, plan it out properly. Tonight, Dominic interrupted. All of it. I want George and Sarah Graham to be sitting in that conference room, congratulating themselves on putting me in my place, when their phones start exploding with notifications. I want them to watch their empire collapse in real time while the taste of victory is still fresh. The sedan turned onto a quieter street, away from the commercial district. Trees lined the sidewalk here, their leaves rustling in the wind that promised rain. Dominic could see his reflection in the window, wine-stained, ruined, defeated-looking. He smiled at it, a real smile this time. Marcus, he said, his voice dropping lower, taking on the tone that people who'd worked for him learned to recognize as absolute finality. I've spent 20 years building legitimate businesses, playing by their rules, pretending that money earned in boardrooms somehow counted more than money earned in the streets. I've smiled at people I wanted to bury. I've shaken hands with people who deserved to have them broken. I've let them think I was one of them, that I'd forgotten where I came from and what I'm capable of. He paused, watching the city slide past, all those lights representing all those lives, none of them aware that the man in the wine-stained suit had just declared war. Tonight, he continued, the Grahams reminded me that no matter how much money I have, no matter how legitimate my businesses look, no matter how perfect my transformation appears, to people like them, I'm always going to be the nobody they can pour wine on for entertainment. So you're reminding them who you actually are, Marcus finished. No, Dominic said softly. I'm showing them there's a difference. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, the offshore accounts, do you want me to touch those? Not yet, Dominic said. Those are for later if they don't learn the lesson. Right now, I just want their visible empire destroyed. The things they can see crumbling, the things they'll have to explain to their investors and their board and their strategics. Consider it done. Anything else? Dominic thought about Sarah's smile as she'd raised the wine glass, about George's casual cruelty, about the strategics recording on their phones, laughing, treating humiliation like entertainment. Yes, he said. I want you to send a message to every investment firm, every development company, every financial institution that does business in this city. Tell them that Cross Ventures is looking for new partnerships. Tell them we have significant capital available for the right opportunities. Tell them we're especially interested in projects that might be experiencing sudden funding gaps. Marcus laughed, short and sharp. You're going to buy the pieces of what you're destroying. At a discount, Dominic confirmed. Why waste a crisis? You're terrifying sometimes. You know that, right? Tonight, Dominic said, I'm counting on it. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket. The sedan had reached the outskirts of the city now, heading toward the private estate where Dominic actually lived, far from the penthouse apartments and luxury towers where people like the Grahams performed their wealth for each other. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, first accounts frozen, withdrawal notice drafted, press releases going out in 15 minutes. Let me know if you want to slow down. Dominic typed back with wine-sticky fingers. Accelerate. Another buzz. You're the boss. Enjoy the show. He looked at his reflection in the window one more time. The wine had mostly dried now, leaving his hair stiff and dark, his shirt stained beyond saving, his suit ruined beyond repair. $3,000 worth of Italian tailoring, destroyed by $1,200 worth of French wine. It was going to cost the Grahams considerably more than that. The sedan turned onto a private road, trees closing in on both sides, the city lights fatting behind them. Ahead, gates rose out of the darkness, iron and stone and security systems that could probably repel a small army. Home. Dominic's phone started buzzing continuously now, notifications coming in rapid fire. The machine had started moving. The directive had been given. In boardrooms and bank offices across the city, people were making calls, sending emails, pulling files, executing orders that would reshape everything the Grahams had built. And 47 floors above the city, in a conference room that still smelled like expensive wine, 6 strategics and 2 would-be emperors had no idea that their world had just ended. The bloodbath. The conference room had settled into the comfortable rhythm of victory. Sarah had poured herself another glass of wine, a different bottle this time, a Chateauneuf Dupape that cost slightly less, but tasted just as sweet when you were celebrating. George sat at the head of the table, tie loosened, reviewing emails on his tablet with the satisfied focus of a man who just reinforced his dominance. The strategics had returned to their natural positions around the table, the tension from Dominic's exit dissolving into the kind of manic energy that followed a successful kill. Eva was on her phone, probably already crafting the story she'd tell at next week's industry mixer. Anderson had his feet up on the chair Dominic had occupied, scrolling through the video Jessica had taken, watching the wine pour over and over again. I'm posting this, Jessica announced, holding up her phone. I mean, not publicly, obviously, but the private executive group chat is going to lose their minds. Do it, Sarah said, waving her wine glass in permission. Let them see what happens when someone tries to play above their level. Victoria and Swan had moved to the windows, looking down at the city below, probably trying to spot Dominic's inevitable retreat through the streets 47 floors down. Brock leaned against the wall by the door, arms crossed, the faint smile of someone who'd enjoyed watching someone else get put in their place without having to do the putting himself. "You think he'll try to sue?" Anderson asked, pausing the video on a frame where wine was mid-pour, catching the light like liquid rubies. George shook his head without looking up from his tablet. With what lawyers? The man couldn't afford a decent suit. He's not affording litigation against Graham Industries. Plus, Eva added, what's he going to claim? That we hurt his feelings? That we were mean to him in a private business meeting? Good luck finding a judge who cares. Sarah raised her glass. To knowing your place, and to those who need help learning it. The strategics lifted their drinks in response, voices overlapping in agreement, laughter building again. It was the kind of moment that bonded people together, the shared cruelty creating a story they'd tell for years, a legend they'd build into their mythology of power. Then Eva's tablet chimed, not the soft notification sound of an email or message, the sharp, insistent alert she'd programmed for urgent financial updates. She glanced down at it, still smiling, expecting some routine market movement or news alert. Her smile froze. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face so quickly it looked like someone had pulled a plug. "What is it?" Sarah asked, still mid-celebration. Eva's fingers moved across the tablet screen, swiping, tapping, pulling up windows that multiplied faster than she could process them. "This can't be right." "What can't be right?" George set down his own tablet, his tone shifting from relaxed to focused in an instant. "Our primary Morgan Stanley account, it's showing frozen." The room went silent. Anderson took his feet off the chair. Jessica lowered her phone. Swan and Victoria turned from the windows. "Frozen," George stood, moving around the table toward Eva. "What do you mean frozen?" "I mean locked, no access. Status shows administrative hold effective immediately." Eva's voice had gone higher, faster. "But that's impossible. We don't have any holds on that account. There's no pending litigation, no regulatory review, nothing that would trigger." George's phone buzzed, then Sarah's, then Anderson's, then all of them, a cascade of notifications that filled the room with electronic chirping like a flock of mechanical birds. George grabbed his phone, his face going through the same transformation Eva's had, confusion, disbelief, denial, then something approaching fear. Wells Fargo, same thing. Account frozen, administrative hold. Bank of America too, Sarah said, her wine glass forgotten in her other hand. "George, what the hell is happening?" Eva was frantically swiping through screens now, pulling up account after account. Chase, frozen, Citibank, frozen, First Republic, frozen. Her voice rose with each word. "They're all frozen, every single one." Anderson had his laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. "This has to be a system error, some kind of banking glitch. There's no way." His screen flashed red. A notification banner appeared across the top. Credit line TRMINATED, immediate effect. "No," Anderson whispered. "No, no, no." Swan had moved to the conference room computer, the large monitor they used for presentations. He pulled up Graham Industries' financial dashboard, the real-time overview that showed all their accounts, investments, and active projects. The screen loaded slowly, data populating field by field. Every number was red. Every status showed frozen or TRMINATED or hold. "This isn't possible," Swan said, but his voice carried no conviction. "This level of coordination across multiple institutions, all at exactly the same time. This isn't a glitch." "Then what is it?" Victoria's voice cracked. She had her phone pressed to her ear. "My contact at Morgan Stanley isn't answering. Neither is the one at Wells Fargo." Sarah slammed her wine glass down on the table hard enough that the stem cracked. Red wine sloshed across the glass surface, pooling around the stained contract Dominic had left behind. "Someone call the banks. Demand an explanation. This is Graham Industries. They can't just..." Brock's phone rang, the sound cutting through the rising panic. He answered, listened for 5 seconds, then his face went pale. Turn on CNBC, now. Anderson grabbed the remote, pointed it at the wall-mounted television. The screen flickered to life, showing the familiar CNBC studio, the anchor in mid-sentence. Shocking development as Cross Ventures has officially withdrawn from its proposed merger with Graham Industries. The withdrawal notice, filed just minutes ago, cites irreconcilable differences in corporate values and partnership expectations. Perhaps most notably, the statement indicates that Cross Ventures will be pulling all associated investments and partnerships, effective immediately. Sarah made a sound like she'd been punched. George gripped the back of Eva's chair, knuckles white. The anchor continued, glancing at something off-screen. We're now receiving reports that multiple Graham Industries development projects are experiencing sudden funding withdrawals. The Harbor District renovation, the West Side luxury development, the Downtown Tower project, all reportedly losing key financial backing within the last 30 minutes. 30 minutes, Eva repeated numbly. He left here 30 minutes ago. The anchor's expression shifted to something more serious. And in what can only be described as extraordinary timing, we're also seeing reports of coordinated account freezes across multiple banking institutions, all connected to Graham Industries. While no official explanation has been provided, sources are suggesting this may be connected to the Cross Ventures withdrawal. George's tablet chimed again. He looked down at it, and whatever he saw there made him sit down heavily in the nearest chair. We just lost the West Side partners. They're pulling out, citing the Cross withdrawal as creating too much uncertainty. Harbor District just sent termination notice, Anderson said, staring at his laptop screen. They're invoking the funding stability clause. Jessica's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She looked at it like it was a snake. I'm getting messages from everyone. Investors asking what's happening. Partners demanding explanations. The media wanting comments. Eva had stopped swiping through her tablet. She just sat there, staring at the wall of red numbers on the monitor, her professional composure completely shattered. This is surgical, she said quietly. This level of coordination, this speed, the targeting of specific institutions and partnerships. Whoever's doing this knows exactly where we're vulnerable. Cross, Sarah said. The word came out strangled, barely above a whisper. It has to be Cross. Cross, Anderson laughed, but it sounded hysterical. That nobody in the cheap suit. He couldn't even afford a legal team. How would he have the resources to? He made one phone call, Brock interrupted. Everyone turned to look at him. In the elevator. I saw him through the hallway security feed. He made one phone call. The room fell silent, except for the continued buzzing of phones, and the CNBC anchor's voice detailing the expanding catastrophe. George stood slowly, walked to the window where Victoria and Swan had been standing. He looked down at the city, at the lights spreading out in every direction, at the empire he'd spent 30 years building. How much? He asked, his voice barely audible. Eva consulted her tablet, though her hands were shaking now. If the freezes hold, if the partnerships actually terminate, if the development projects collapse, she swallowed hard. Conservatively, we're looking at $200 million in immediate exposure, maybe more. By midnight, Swan added, still staring at the red screen, we might not have access to operating capital, which means we can't make payroll, can't pay contractors, can't service our debts. Another wave of notifications hit everyone's phones simultaneously. Anderson checked his, and whatever he saw there made him close his eyes. The press has it now, not just business outlets. CNN, Fox Business, Bloomberg, they're all running the story. Graham Industries facing massive financial crisis following mysterious investor withdrawal. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. We need to call him. Cross, we need to fix this, apologize, whatever it takes. We don't have his number, Eva said flatly. Then find it. Sarah's voice rose to a shriek. Find him. Someone in this goddamn room figure out how to contact Cross Ventures and get that man on the phone. Jessica was already typing frantically. The Cross Ventures website just has a general inquiry form. No direct numbers. No executive contacts. Try the number from the original proposal, George said, moving back to the table. Eva pulled up files, found the proposal document, dialed the number listed. It rang 4 times, then went to a generic voicemail. She tried again. Same result. Victoria had her phone to her ear, calling someone else. Michael, it's Victoria Graham. I need you to find everything you can on Cross Ventures. Registration, ownership, contact information, everything. A pause. I don't care what time it is. I don't care that it's after hours. Figure it out. The television continued its recitation of disaster. More projects reporting funding withdrawals. More banks declining to comment. More analysts speculating about what had triggered such a sudden, coordinated collapse. George's phone rang. He answered it immediately, hope flashing across his face. Hello, his expression fell. Yes, this is George Graham. He listened, his face growing paler. I understand. No, I understand. He ended the call. Who was that? Sarah demanded. Our insurance carrier. They're reviewing our coverage in light of what they're calling unprecedented financial instability. Brock's phone rang again. He listened, nodded, hung up. Security downstairs. There are reporters in the lobby. They're asking for statements. The room erupted in overlapping voices. Panic, denial, blame, desperate planning. Through it all, the CNBC anchor's voice continued, cataloging the destruction in real time, while phones kept buzzing and screens kept showing red, and the empire the Grahams had built with arrogance and cruelty crumbled around them. Somewhere in the chaos, Eva looked at the contract still sitting on the table, wine-stained and ruined, and said something that no one heard over the noise, but that was perhaps the truest thing anyone had said all night. We never even asked his first name. The reveal. Swan hadn't moved from the computer monitor in 20 minutes. While the others spiraled through panic and denial, making frantic calls and refreshing news feeds, he'd gone quiet. Eerily quiet. His fingers moved methodically across the keyboard, pulling up files, cross-referencing data, following threads that led deeper and deeper into territory that made his hands go cold. The conference room had devolved into controlled chaos. George was on his 3rd call with their legal team, his voice oscillating between commanding and desperate. Sarah paced near the windows, phone pressed to her ear, trying to reach board members who were suddenly unavailable. Eva sat at the table surrounded by tablets and laptops, watching their financial infrastructure collapse in real time. Anderson had his head in his hands. Jessica kept refreshing social media, watching the story spread across platforms like a virus. Victoria was trying to compose a statement that wouldn't sound like the desperate lie it was. Brock stood near the door, arms crossed, watching everything with the detached assessment of someone calculating his exit strategy. Swan pulled up another window, then another. His breathing had changed, coming faster now, shallower. He zoomed in on an image, studied it, then typed something else into the search bar. Oh God, he said quietly. No one heard him over the noise. He tried again, louder. Oh my God. Eva glanced up. What? Swan's face had gone beyond pale into something approaching gray. His hands trembled on the keyboard. I know who he is. The room didn't quiet immediately. George was still mid-sentence with the lawyer. Sarah was arguing with someone about damage control, but Eva stood, moving toward the monitor, and her movement drew the others' attention. What are you talking about? Eva asked. Swan pointed at the screen with a shaking finger. Cross, Dominic Cross, I know who he is. We all know who he is, Anderson said irritably. He's the idiot who showed up in a cheap suit and... He's not an idiot, Swan interrupted, his voice rising. He's the head of the Cross Syndicate. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Everyone stopped. George lowered his phone. Sarah turned from the window. Jessica's fingers froze mid-type. Even Brock straightened, his expression shifting from detached to alert. The what? Sarah said. Swan was typing again, pulling up articles, documents, files. The Cross Syndicate. It's been whispered about in financial circles for years. Organized crime family that went legitimate about a decade ago. Started in the streets, protection rackets, smuggling, the usual. But then someone took over, someone smart, someone patient. They started transitioning the money, buying legitimate businesses, real estate, investment firms, making it all clean. He pulled up a grainy photograph from what looked like a law enforcement database. The image showed a man in shadow, face partially obscured, but the profile was unmistakable. Same jawline, same build. "That's him," Eva breathed. "That's Cross." Swan nodded, clicking through more files. Dominic Cross, age 38. No convictions, but suspected involvement in everything from labor racketeering to high-level financial crimes. The FBI has been trying to build a case against him for 15 years and can't make anything stick because he's too smart, too careful, and too well-connected. "This is insane," Anderson said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "You're saying we just poured wine on a mob boss?" "Not just a mob boss," Swan corrected, his voice tight. "The mob boss. The Cross Syndicate controls an estimated $500 million in legitimate assets across this city. Real estate, construction, labor unions, financial services. They have people in City Hall, in the police department, in regulatory agencies. They're not some street gang. They're a shadow government." George had gone completely still, phone hanging forgotten in his hand. $500 million. Swan pulled up more files. "Look at this. Cross Ventures isn't some startup. It's the primary holding company for the entire syndicate. They own pieces of 70 different businesses in this city. They have partnerships with 3 major banks. They control labor unions that can shut down construction across 6 districts." He clicked to another document. "And look at this. Cross Ventures has been quietly acquiring distressed assets for the past decade. Companies that get into financial trouble mysteriously find themselves with frozen accounts, terminated partnerships, coordinated pressure from multiple institutions. Then Cross Ventures swoops in, buys everything for pennies on the dollar, and absorbs it into their network." The implications settled over the room like fog. Eva sank back into her chair. Victoria's phone slipped from her hand. Anderson made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "We didn't just humiliate some random investor," Swan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We humiliated the most dangerous man in the city, and he didn't get dangerous by forgiving disrespect." Brock moved to the monitor, studying the files Swan had pulled up. This pattern, the frozen accounts, the terminated partnerships, the coordinated institutional pressure. He looked at George. "That's not normal business competition. That's the Cross playbook. He's done this before, probably dozens of times." Sarah had pressed her hand to her mouth. When she spoke, her voice was muffled. "The wine. I poured wine on a Mafia boss." "While we all laughed and recorded it," Jessica added, her face ashen. "While we mocked him and called him nobody and treated him like garbage." Swan pulled up another file, this one showing a timeline. "Here, Harrison Development Group. 2 years ago, they had some kind of dispute with Cross Ventures over a contract. Within 24 hours, their accounts froze. Their partnerships dissolved. Their construction permits got mysteriously held up. Within a week, they were bankrupt. Cross Ventures bought their assets for 30 cents on the dollar." "Morrison Financial," Brock read from another file Swan had opened. "Same pattern, disagreement with Cross, coordinated institutional pressure, bankruptcy, acquisition." "Westbridge Properties, Talbot Industries, Chen Real Estate Group." Swan was clicking through files now, showing case after case. All of them challenged or disrespected Cross in some way, all of them destroyed within days, all of them absorbed into the Cross empire. Eva's voice came out strangled. "How many?" 12 companies in the last 5 years, Swan said. "That we can confirm, probably more that we don't know about." George finally moved, walking to the monitor, staring at the evidence of what they'd done. "And we just—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "We challenged him," Swan finished. "We insulted him. We humiliated him in front of witnesses, on camera, in a way that he can't ignore even if he wanted to. Because in his world, respect is currency. And we just announced to everyone watching that Dominic Cross could be disrespected without consequences. So he has to make an example of us," Brock said quietly. "Not because he's angry, Because if he doesn't, every other competitor, every other rival, everyone who's been afraid of him starts thinking maybe he's gone soft. Maybe the transition to legitimate business has made him weak. Sarah let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a cry. We didn't just pour wine on him, we forced him to destroy us. Victoria had picked up her phone again, pulling up news feeds. It's already spreading. Look, the narrative isn't just about the merger falling through. People are asking questions. Who is Cross Ventures? Where did they come from? Why do they have so much power over banking institutions? Someone's going to figure it out, Anderson said. Some journalist, some investigator. They're going to dig into Cross Ventures and find what Swan just found. And then the story becomes Graham Industries humiliated organized crime boss and paid the price. Eva was scrolling through her tablet, her professional mind apparently still functioning despite the horror. We need to contact him. Immediately. Apologize. Offer restitution. Whatever it takes. Restitution for what? Swan asked. For disrespecting him, for treating him like he was nothing. You can't unpour that wine. You can't unrecord those videos. Every person in this room witnessed what happened. Some of us participated. We can't take it back. George turned from the monitor, his face having aged a decade in the last hour. The account freezes, the partnership terminations. That's just the beginning, isn't it? Swan nodded slowly. If the pattern holds, this gets worse, much worse. The freezes become permanent. The partnerships don't just terminate, they publicly cite our instability as the reason. Other businesses start avoiding us because being associated with us becomes toxic. Contractors stop returning calls. Suppliers demand payment up front. Insurance carriers drop coverage. How long? Sarah asked. How long until we're completely bankrupt? If he follows his usual timeline. Swan checked the files again. 72 hours, 3 days from the initial incident to complete financial collapse. Brock had moved to the window, looking down at the city. We're on hour 1. The room fell silent except for the continued buzzing of phones and the low murmur of the television still cataloging their destruction. Swan kept staring at the monitor, at the photograph of Dominic Cross, at the files documenting his systematic dismantling of everyone who'd ever challenged him. There's something else, Swan said quietly. In every case, Cross offered the targets one chance, one opportunity to make things right before the final blow, usually within the first 24 hours. Make things right how? Eva asked. Swan pulled up another document. Complete capitulation, public apology, transfer of assets, sometimes all three. The targets who took the deal survived barely. The ones who refused or tried to fight back. He didn't need to finish. George's phone rang. Everyone jumped. He looked at the screen and his hand started shaking. It's an unlisted number. Answer it, Sarah said urgently. Answer it now. George pressed the button, put it on speaker. Hello. Silence. Then a voice they all recognized, quiet and measured, and carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Mr. Graham, I believe we have something to discuss. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Dominic Cross had given them their chance. The final lesson. The address Dominic had given them wasn't what they expected. Not a downtown penthouse or a luxury high-rise office. Not even a legitimate business front. Just coordinates that led their car 40 minutes outside the city, through winding roads that got progressively darker, progressively more isolated, until the GPS announced they'd arrived at a property that looked more like a fortress than a home. Iron gates rose from stone pillars, security cameras tracking their approach. George had driven himself, unable to trust even a driver with what they were about to do. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her emerald dress from earlier replaced with something subdued, almost penitent. In the back seat, Eva and Swan had insisted on coming, both understanding that this wasn't just about the Grahams anymore. This was about everyone who'd been in that room. The gates opened without them having to announce themselves. Someone had been watching. Someone was always watching. They drove up a long driveway lined with oak trees, their branches forming a tunnel that blocked out the moonlight. At the end sat a sprawling estate, not ostentatious, but undeniably powerful. Stone and timber, lights glowing from windows, the kind of place that looked like old money but had been built with something much darker. A man in a dark suit waited by the entrance. Not Dominic, someone else. Someone whose face carried the kind of scars that came from a life George and Sarah had only seen in movies. "Mr. and Mrs. Graham," the man said. His voice was polite, but there was nothing welcoming in it. "Mr. Cross is expecting you. Leave your phones in the car." They complied without argument. George set his phone in the cup holder with trembling hands. Sarah placed hers beside it. Eva and Swan did the same. The man led them through the entrance into a foyer that smelled of wood smoke and old leather. No corporate art here. No glass and chrome. Just dark wood panels, a stone fireplace, and the sense that this place had seen things that would never be spoken about in polite company. They walked down a hallway, their footsteps muffled by Persian rugs that probably cost more than the wine Sarah had wasted. The man stopped at a heavy wooden door, knocked twice, then opened it. The study beyond was exactly what a predator's den should look like. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk that looked hand-carved from a single piece of timber. Low lighting from lamps that created more shadows than illumination. And behind the desk, wearing a fresh charcoal suit with no trace of wine stains, sat Dominic Cross. He didn't stand when they entered, didn't acknowledge them immediately. Just finished writing something in a ledger with a fountain pen, his movements unhurried, deliberate, making them wait, making them feel what it was like to be kept standing, to be deemed less important than the task at hand. Finally, he set down the pen and looked up. His face showed no anger, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. Just the same flat calm he'd maintained when Sarah had poured wine over his head. Somehow, that was more terrifying than rage would have been. "Sit," he said quietly. There were 4 chairs arranged in front of the desk. They sat, George and Sarah in the center, Eva and Swan flanking them like witnesses at an execution. Dominic folded his hands on the desk, the same position he'd held at the Graham conference table. "You came quickly. That shows intelligence, or desperation, probably both." "Mr. Cross," George began, his voice cracking slightly. "We came too." "Apologize," Dominic interrupted. "Beg, offer me money to undo what I've done." He leaned back in his chair. "Which one were you planning to lead with?" Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "All of them, whatever you want, whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes," Dominic repeated, as if tasting the words. "Interesting choice of phrase, Mrs. Graham, because what it takes is something you can't give. What it takes is erasing tonight, unpouring that wine, unrecording those videos, unwatching what your strategics watched and did nothing to stop." "We didn't know," Eva said quickly. "We didn't know who you were." "No," Dominic agreed. "You didn't. You saw a man in a simple suit with no entourage and decided that meant he was nobody, that he was less than you, that he could be mocked and humiliated for entertainment." He paused. "The question is, if you had known who I was, would you have behaved differently?" The question hung in the air. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it again. They all knew the answer. They all knew that treating people with respect only when they could hurt you wasn't respect at all. "I grew up in rooms that made your boardroom look like a kindergarten," Dominic continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. "I learned early that power isn't about who has the most money or the best suit or the fanciest title. Power is about what you're willing to do, what you're capable of doing, what people believe you'll do if they cross you." He stood, moving to a cabinet behind his desk. He poured himself water from a crystal decanter, just water, nothing expensive, and took a slow sip before continuing. "I spent 20 years building legitimate businesses, transforming money earned in violence into money earned in boardrooms. I followed your rules, played your games, made myself look acceptable to people like you." He set down the glass. "And tonight, you showed me exactly how acceptable I am. You showed me that no matter how much I clean up, no matter how legitimate I become, to people like you I'm still just someone you can pour wine on." "That's not," George started. "Don't," Dominic cut him off. "Don't insult me further by lying. Your wife didn't pour that wine because she was confused. She poured it because she enjoyed it. Because humiliating someone she perceived as beneath her made her feel powerful. And all of you watched. All of you laughed. All of you participated in your own way. Swan cleared his throat. We came to make amends, to offer restitution. Dominic turned his attention to Swan. You're the one who figured it out, who I actually am. I saw it on the security feed from your building, you putting it together, realizing your mistake. Yes, Swan admitted. And now you're here, offering restitution, because you understand what happens to people who disrespect me and don't make amends. Dominic walked around the desk, leaning against it, closer to them now. You've seen the pattern. The companies I've absorbed, the empires I've dismantled. You know what's coming. Please, Sarah whispered. We made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but surely there's a way to. To what? Dominic asked. To fix it, to make it right. He shook his head slowly. Mrs. Graham, in my world, respect isn't negotiable. It's not something you can buy back after you've sold it for the price of entertainment. Disrespect has a cost, and that cost is always paid in full. Eva leaned forward. What do you want? Name it. Assets, public apology, transfer of ownership, whatever it is. What I want, Dominic said quietly, is for you to understand something. The legitimate world you're so proud of, the corporate hierarchy you use to measure worth, the social structures that let you determine who deserves respect and who doesn't, all of that only exists because people like me allow it to exist. The real power in this city doesn't sit in boardrooms. It sits in rooms like this, with people like me, and you forgot that. He moved back behind his desk, sat down, folded his hands again. Your accounts will remain frozen. Your partnerships will stay terminated. Your development projects will collapse. By this time tomorrow, Graham Industries will be functionally bankrupt. By the end of the week, you'll be selling assets to cover debts. Within a month, everything you built will be absorbed by other companies. Some of them mine. Some of them belonging to people who owe me favors. You're destroying us, George said, his voice hollow. No, Dominic corrected. You destroyed yourselves the moment you decided that disrespect was entertainment. I'm simply collecting the bill. Sarah's face had gone completely white. There's nothing we can do, nothing that would change your mind. Dominic studied her for a long moment. If I showed mercy now, what message would that send? That Dominic Cross can be humiliated publicly, and if you apologize nicely enough, everything goes back to normal. That would make me look weak, and in my world, weakness is fatal. So this is just about your reputation, Eva said, a flash of anger breaking through her fear. No, Dominic said. This is about the lesson. You need to learn it. Everyone watching needs to see it learned. Disrespect has a cost. That cost is non-negotiable. That cost is absolute. He opened a drawer in his desk, pulled out a folder, slid it across to them. George opened it with shaking hands. Inside were documents, buyout offers for their remaining assets, all at prices so low they might as well have been insults. When you're ready to sell, Dominic said, my people will be waiting. Until then, you have 48 hours before I start making additional calls. Calls that will ensure no one in this city does business with Graham Industries ever again. Calls that will turn your name into poison in every market that matters. They sat in silence, the weight of their destruction settling over them like concrete. Finally, George stood, the folder clutched in his hands. You're right, he said quietly. We didn't know who you were, but that's not an excuse. We should have treated you with respect regardless. Not because of who you turned out to be, but because that's what decent people do. Dominic's expression didn't change. You're learning, too late, but you're learning. Sarah stood too, followed by Eva and Swan. They moved toward the door like people walking away from their own graves. Mr. and Mrs. Graham, Dominic said as they reached the threshold. They turned. The wine you poured cost $1,200. The lesson you just learned will cost you everything you own. Remember that ratio the next time you're tempted to humiliate someone for entertainment. They left without another word. The man who'd escorted them in appeared to lead them out. Their footsteps faded down the hallway. Dominic sat alone in his study, the fire crackling in the hearth, the city's lights visible through the windows. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, final partnerships terminated. Press has the full story. Graham Industries stock suspended from trading. He set the phone down and picked up his fountain pen again, returning to the ledger he'd been writing in when they arrived. Just another entry in the long history of the Cross Syndicate. Another lesson taught. Another empire absorbed. Outside, the Graham car pulled through the iron gates and disappeared into the night, carrying 4 people who'd learned the hardest truth of all. That in the real world, the one that existed beneath the polished surfaces and corporate hierarchies, power belonged to those who understood that respect wasn't given freely. It was enforced absolutely. And Dominic Cross was very good at enforcement. The address Dominic had given them wasn't what they expected. Not a downtown penthouse or a luxury high-rise office. Not even a legitimate business front. Just coordinates that led their car 40 minutes outside the city, through winding roads that got progressively darker, progressively more isolated, until the GPS announced they'd arrived at a property that looked more like a fortress than a home. Iron gates rose from stone pillars, security cameras tracking their approach. George had driven himself, unable to trust even a driver with what they were about to do. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her emerald dress from earlier replaced with something subdued, almost penitent. In the back seat, Eva and Swan had insisted on coming, both understanding that this wasn't just about the Grahams anymore. This was about everyone who'd been in that room. The gates opened without them having to announce themselves. Someone had been watching. Someone was always watching. They drove up a long driveway lined with oak trees, their branches forming a tunnel that blocked out the moonlight. At the end sat a sprawling estate, not ostentatious, but undeniably powerful. Stone and timber, lights glowing from windows, the kind of place that looked like old money but had been built with something much darker. A man in a dark suit waited by the entrance. Not Dominic, someone else. Someone whose face carried the kind of scars that came from a life George and Sarah had only seen in movies. "Mr. and Mrs. Graham," the man said. His voice was polite, but there was nothing welcoming in it. "Mr. Cross is expecting you. Leave your phones in the car." They complied without argument. George set his phone in the cup holder with trembling hands. Sarah placed hers beside it. Eva and Swan did the same. The man led them through the entrance into a foyer that smelled of wood smoke and old leather. No corporate art here. No glass and chrome. Just dark wood panels, a stone fireplace, and the sense that this place had seen things that would never be spoken about in polite company. They walked down a hallway, their footsteps muffled by Persian rugs that probably cost more than the wine Sarah had wasted. The man stopped at a heavy wooden door, knocked twice, then opened it. The study beyond was exactly what a predator's den should look like. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk that looked hand-carved from a single piece of timber. Low lighting from lamps that created more shadows than illumination. And behind the desk, wearing a fresh charcoal suit with no trace of wine stains, sat Dominic Cross. He didn't stand when they entered, didn't acknowledge them immediately. Just finished writing something in a ledger with a fountain pen, his movements unhurried, deliberate, making them wait, making them feel what it was like to be kept standing, to be deemed less important than the task at hand. Finally, he set down the pen and looked up. His face showed no anger, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. Just the same flat calm he'd maintained when Sarah had poured wine over his head. Somehow, that was more terrifying than rage would have been. "Sit," he said quietly. There were 4 chairs arranged in front of the desk. They sat, George and Sarah in the center, Eva and Swan flanking them like witnesses at an execution. Dominic folded his hands on the desk, the same position he'd held at the Graham conference table. "You came quickly. That shows intelligence, or desperation, probably both." "Mr. Cross," George began, his voice cracking slightly. "We came too." "Apologize," Dominic interrupted. "Beg, offer me money to undo what I've done." He leaned back in his chair. "Which one were you planning to lead with?" Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "All of them, whatever you want, whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes," Dominic repeated, as if tasting the words. Interesting choice of phrase, Mrs. Graham, because what it takes is something you can't give. What it takes is erasing tonight, unpouring that wine, unrecording those videos, unwatching what your strategics watched and did nothing to stop. We didn't know, Eva said quickly. We didn't know who you were. No, Dominic agreed. You didn't. You saw a man in a simple suit with no entourage and decided that meant he was nobody, that he was less than you, that he could be mocked and humiliated for entertainment. He paused. The question is, if you had known who I was, would you have behaved differently? The question hung in the air. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it again. They all knew the answer. They all knew that treating people with respect only when they could hurt you wasn't respect at all. I grew up in rooms that made your boardroom look like a kindergarten, Dominic continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. I learned early that power isn't about who has the most money or the best suit or the fanciest title. Power is about what you're willing to do, what you're capable of doing, what people believe you'll do if they cross you. He stood, moving to a cabinet behind his desk. He poured himself water from a crystal decanter, just water, nothing expensive, and took a slow sip before continuing. I spent 20 years building legitimate businesses, transforming money earned in violence into money earned in boardrooms. I followed your rules, played your games, made myself look acceptable to people like you. He set down the glass. And tonight, you showed me exactly how acceptable I am. You showed me that no matter how much I clean up, no matter how legitimate I become, to people like you I'm still just someone you can pour wine on. That's not, George started. Don't, Dominic cut him off. Don't insult me further by lying. Your wife didn't pour that wine because she was confused. She poured it because she enjoyed it. Because humiliating someone she perceived as beneath her made her feel powerful. And all of you watched. All of you laughed. All of you participated in your own way. Swan cleared his throat. We came to make amends, to offer restitution. Dominic turned his attention to Swan. You're the one who figured it out, who I actually am. I saw it on the security feed from your building, you putting it together, realizing your mistake. Yes, Swan admitted. And now you're here. Offering restitution because you understand what happens to people who disrespect me and don't make amends. Dominic walked around the desk, leaning against it, closer to them now. You've seen the pattern, the companies I've absorbed, the empires I've dismantled. You know what's coming. Please, Sarah whispered. We made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but surely there's a way to. To what? Dominic asked. To fix it, to make it right. He shook his head slowly. Mrs. Graham, in my world, respect isn't negotiable. It's not something you can buy back after you've sold it for the price of entertainment. Disrespect has a cost, and that cost is always paid in full. Eva leaned forward. What do you want? Name it. Assets, public apology, transfer of ownership, whatever it is. What I want, Dominic said quietly, is for you to understand something. The legitimate world you're so proud of, the corporate hierarchy you use to measure worth, the social structures that let you determine who deserves respect and who doesn't, all of that only exists because people like me allow it to exist. The real power in this city doesn't.